exquisite in the way that things are arranged, and you don't get something for nothing.
There are no free passes in physiology. That's the saying. No free passes. The answer to your question is yes. 100% yes. In fact, that is the only way to go about it. You have two options. You can ingest less carbon, or you can expel more carbon. People always say calories in, calories out. It's really carbon in, carbon out. That's what a calorie is, right? Calorie is the amount of energy we get per breaking a carbon bond. So it's really less in, more out. Less in is fairly obvious, whether that comes in any form. And by the way, this is exactly why the percentage of your intake coming from fats or carbohydrate, it doesn't really matter that much. If you look at fat loss, clinical trials, you guys may have covered this when Lane was in here. I'm sure this is something he talks about a lot. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant because it's not about that. There's nothing magic in those things. They are different and they have different physiological responses. Everything is different, right? No doubt. But in general, it's just simply about carbon intake. Turns out fat has a lot more carbons per mole than carbohydrates do. So there's more calories per mole in there. So if the physical amount of fat needs to come in as a smaller amount, physical amount of carbohydrates will come in as a larger amount, but you can play any number of very high carb, low fat. What matters? Total calories, right? Again, it's not like the only thing that matters, but you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
Some percentages in the way can go. Fat loss works fantastic. High fat, low carbohydrate. Why do all these things work? Because that's not about that. It's about total intake of carbon, total expel. So absolutely, can you lose fat by simply exhaling more? In fact, that is exactly what you did this morning.
When I hopped on the Airdyne bike
when you did anything, right? The question is, can you think of a scenario in which you could have a bunch of increased rates of exhalation that helps in fat loss?
Sure. I can think of a lot of things that will stimulate increased rates of exhalation.
One thing could be simply going, right? And so the question is can I literally do some breath protocols where I force exhale and lose fat? And the answer is yes. But what happens? What happens if you do hyperventilation training?
Well, my lab studies cyclic hyperventilation as one of our many deliberate protocols. And one of the most prominent things that one observes is that levels of adrenaline increase very quickly.
Extremely quickly.
People feel jittery, anxious, stressed, and unless they are consciously trying to anchor their thinking about what that means and the benefit set to persisting, typically they abort the cyclic hyperventilation protocol really quickly.
Within seconds, right? You will feel tingling, sweating, all kinds of things. You're hyperventilating, right? And we could talk ad nauseum about how that changes everything from adrenaline to focus to a whole bunch of things. So unfortunately, a strategy of sitting around, just exhaling more than you inhale, technically helps you lose more fat, but it's not going to last very long. So then the question is, well, how do I get into a situation or a scenario in which I can increase my rate of expiration where I'm not going to pass out and I'm not going and altering hypocapnia and hypercapnia issues? Any idea of a situation in which you would have an enhanced rate of expiration without worrying about passing out?
Sure. Steady state exercise.
Or not steady state exercise, lifting weights, intervals, moderate training, repeated, any of these things. They all work equally for fat loss because all they're doing is increasing respiration rate. They're saying increased demand for energy, increased exhalation. That's the trick here. And when you equate these things to that, they have equal success in fat loss. It doesn't matter, theoretically, where you're getting it from. And so when we get into this idea of, well, what are the best training strategies for fat loss? It doesn't matter which one of these tactics you pick, as long as you maintain a consistent adherence over time. Because of this exact fact. It doesn't matter if you're burning quote unquote fat in the exercise session, or if you're burning carbohydrates in the exercise session. It is totally irrelevant to your net fat loss over time. Okay, now there's some significant misconceptions there about what I just talked, and I would love to come back and walk through that in more detail, but that's the main take-home message here. It won't matter what's coming in and it won't matter what's coming out, because in either case, it is the same rate of oxygen in and CO2 out. That's the key metric. And hopefully this helps a lot of people have some relief because they're like, man, you're so tied up on what is the exact protocol for training for optimizing fat loss. What's the exact nutritional intervention I need for fat loss? And then you wonder why all these different diets can work effectively, and wonder why all these different training protocols. And surely you know somebody who lost a bunch of weight and the only thing they did is they just started running. There was no advanced protocol. They just started running and they ran 5 miles every day. That works. And then tons of people who tried that and like didn't lose anything. And lots of people who went to, I went to cardio kickboxing class, lost weight. Oh, I just started doing intervals on my, why? Mysteriously, do all these things work? Some spidey sense has to be going off in your brain where like, there has to be something linking these things. And what's linking it is simply carbon exchange. So put yourself in a position in which you are exhaling more than you are inhaling without passing out. The other problem is if you were to simply do a breathing protocol, while the rate of exhalation would go up, after that you would correct and go in the opposite direction. So that's the problem, is your net carbon output over the course of the day is not going to change unless you increase the demand for energy. And that's how you get into that negative state.
Along these lines of exhaling carbons,